Andrew, thank you so much for being here. This is going to be fun. I've been looking forward to this for a long time, so welcome.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be here.
Um, I thought we'd start out a little bit with how we met. So I think we met 15 or so years ago. I remember you were teaching at Georgetown, and I must have come to one of your lectures or you were guest speaking somewhere. And I guess you probably had just rolled off working for the military. Maybe you were still at that point there. But I remember hearing you talk about human performance and biology and, you know, all of our elite performers in the military and otherwise. And so whenever I picture you, I picture the most interesting man in the world. So, so I know this is going to be a fascinating conversation, but I want to start, kind of very early on. I imagine you as in the envelope pushing business. There are limits we have physiologically, biologically, and your mission is really to push those limits. And so I'm curious if you could tell us when you first noticed that that was an interest of yours.
Yeah. Ended up working with the military kind of through this series of serendipities. My dad's a doctor. If I lived my life 10 times, I would have been a doctor, five of them. My mom's side of the family was military way back, including some, like, pardon my French, no shit war hero kind of stuff. And so I had this kind of interest in both international world, in science, technology, national security. And strangely enough, I found a program where I could study that in school. And that really kicked off, this even deeper interest in how technology and national security interplayed. And as I went further, I ended up getting a government fellowship to go to graduate school. And so I ended up doing this kind of weird mix of immunology and health physics and national security policy. And somebody walked into the career center one day and said, "Hey, we need someone who does biology, national security, and can write." And they're like, "Well, we know this guy, Andrew." And what was so fascinating about this opportunity, which ended up being to run kind of analytical studies on the future of human performance from the military, was when you dig into these systems, military, the Pentagon's 25,000 people or so. Militaries are these very high tech, potentially systems, but the role of the humans is dramatic. So, one of the kind of stories I like to tell, and I'll bring this back, is like why basically the pitch line here is humans still matter a lot. And in fact, humans are often the highest leverage point. And that's what makes me interested in enhancing humans. Um, but to tell the story of Top Gun, we go to war in Vietnam. There's the Air Force and the Navy. They're both flying fighter jets. And they're both killing about one North Vietnamese jet for every jet we lose. I'm sorry, two for every one we lose. But a 2-for-1 exchange ratio is much worse than we thought. And so, as we move forward, they both say, like, something's wrong. We need to fix what's going on. And so the Air Force says, we need to fix the missiles. This is the beginning of the missile age. They, believe the missiles meant dogfighting didn't matter anymore. And so they need to fix the missiles.
Technology will solve everything. Which leads me to, a question around human performance. So you and I throw around that phrase a lot. What does human performance mean to you? And I'm curious again to go back. Your dad's a doctor, and you've had a lot of military folks. So that's the kind of overlay or intersection. But I'm curious if there is anything in your childhood where you think back now and you go, "Oh, I've always been interested in pushing the limits and human performance."
So, going back to childhood, I think I just like to understand how things worked. And the body and brain have to be about, as complex as a thing we have to understand. So there's sort of an unlimited ability to be like, oh, now today I learned this fascinating thing. And then what about this influence we weren't thinking about? So I think that keeps me engaged. And then when I think about human performance, I think about a few different ways. One, there's sort of like, how do we break it down? Cognitive, physical, and social emotional, which includes things like leadership as well. So that's one way I think about it. The other way is like, I think a lot about what people care about. And as best I can tell, nobody cares about their health and people only care about four things. So nobody cares about their health might seem like a strident statement to some people, but it's this like long term kind of abstract concepts. Here's what I think people care about: performing at their job or mission, in relationships, which includes, both friends, spouses, um, sports and hobbies, and how they look and feel. And so people might say, well, somebody, God forbid, gets cancer, they care about their health. And I'm like, honestly, most of the time, those people care about their families, or they care about things that aren't done in their life. So again, I want to focus on what people really care about. And oh, by the way, having good health is generally helps everything you care about. So it's sort of, health in for me is upstream of the impact, but downstream of what people care about. So I always want to think about what people care about first, because that's the only way you're going to get someone to do something in this world.
So let's jump into the environment, because at Frequency we're all about creating spaces where people feel good, and I know that particularly, I imagine when you were working with the military, there were some very interesting and challenging environments that you had to help people navigate. So can I'd love to hear some stories about environments where you thought, oh my gosh, how are we gonna help people perform optimally, under the sea or in the air. I'd love to hear some stories about that.
Yeah. So, I mean, one of my favorite, and because this led to something kind of important for what I do now, is I got to know some SEALs who were part of a unit that that has basically, they take a little mini sub, but it's open to water. It's called a SEAL delivery vehicle. And they can do very long dive missions. You can imagine maybe they need to go from point A to a beach or somewhere that's far away, and you don't want to go close with a sub or whatever, big sub that's taking you there. Anyway, it's a very specialized mission. These are obviously incredibly talented people who are physically elite, for lack of a better word. But can you imagine a 6 to 8 hour dive mission in cold water, especially for
No.
anyone here who's ever scuba dived? And they're not wearing a dry suit. You're in a wetsuit here. So like it's cold. There is some data on like blood sugar and other levels in people in these missions. And it's like some people would be dead with the physiological readings that some of these SEALs have. But obviously they're incredibly resilient. So I was trying to think about like, how do you support someone's performance through an 8 hour dive? And like suddenly you start to get these questions like, are you going to eat? Are you going to drink water? I mean, some of these people were losing tens of pounds in water weight during a mission. And so, like, I love this question of like, okay, if we haven't thought about this, and I sort of ended up, finishing my work with the military before we sort of delivered any products. But like, the question was like, what could I put in a tube that someone could drink? And then you don't have any, you can't have like a wrapper that you leave behind or something like while somebody's doing a secret mission. So, um, anyways, that was like the kind of prototype of an insanely stressful environment, both because of the mission and just it's cold, it's dark, it's you're doing very technical things. So that's an example of a very, very tough environment. But again, we have people in the military who can handle and excel in that environment.
One of the things that I find amazing is I put these blue light blocking glasses on and I immediately get tired. And so you mentioned light being a big factor in our environment. Can you talk us through, if you have to go to sleep and you put those glasses on, what's actually happening to our brain or to our physiology?
Yeah. So thanks for the shout out to FlyKit. It's been a labor of love and actually came out of that work with the Navy SEALs, and I can explain that story at some point. But so light, we have visual receptors in our eyes, and they let us see the world around us. That's one of our primary senses. But we also have non-visual receptors that are especially sensing blue and a little bit of green light, and then signaling to the suprachiasmatic nucleus is part of our brain that sort of manages our circadian rhythm. And that blue light signaling is telling our brain basically that it's daytime. If you go back to our evolutionary history, when the only light we could make with was fire, that fire is going to be red or orange. And so there's no sort of the blue fire you get on your gas stoves today is because it's burning much hotter than wood would burn. And then if you go even further back, there's reasons that our circadian system runs off blue light about how light kind of penetrates water and the ocean and other reasons. But long story short, we evolved that the only blue light, at least the only powerful blue light in the universe around us, was from the sun. And so that makes the sun this incredible mechanism to entrain you to daytime. And so we have these receptors that basically tell our brain it's daytime, it's daytime, it's daytime constantly. And it's not only blue light, there's some evidence also that just brightness of light is also stimulatory. And so basically, when you put on these white glasses, and I have a pair on my desk here, if I grab them, you can
Amazing.
see these lenses are like quite orange.
Yeah.
And the reason they're orange is because they're absorbing blue light and just reflecting back the red and orange components. So, tip to people, if you have blue light blocking glasses that have clear lenses or yellow lenses, those might help with eye strain for the computer, but they're not doing anything for nighttime. So, anyways, long story short, by blocking that blue frequency light, you're basically telling your brain it's nighttime because you've removed that daytime stimulus. And now your brain can start naturally producing melatonin and start getting you kind of ready for sleep. One other pitch is, for people who play video games or watch exciting movies or TV at night, there's this interaction effect between bright light and exciting content that actually makes it doubly worse. And so the standard kind of wind down for a lot of people, which actually is pretty exciting, can be a double whammy and can actually make classes like this even more valuable.